My name is Herbert Heitmann. I'm the president of the EACD, the European Association of Communication Directors, and I'm very happy to welcome so many of our colleagues here in Madrid. It's the first time for us to be here. The Forum is one of the two flagship events the EACD conducts every year. Actually, we have three. We have the big summit in Brussels that some of you might have experienced. We have the Circle, which is a little bit smaller setting for the most senior communicators that tours around Europe. And we have the Forum, which we conduct every year in a different city, and where we focus on a topic of greater relevance for this moment in time. And so I'm very happy that we could win you over to join us here to discuss the very special relationship between a CEO and the CCO. This is a topic for us as a EACD of great interest, because we see on the one side that things are changing, actually quite drastically. And on the other side, we also realize, and that was a topic the board here in Madrid spent half a day on, that we want to make the EACD even more attractive, particularly for CCOs. So therefore, it's also very timely for us. Why is it so special? I can talk about my own experiences as a CCO in big international corporations. When I started, I realized that I had a special status at the management table. I sometimes felt like an artist who was allowed to do all different kind of things, but he didn't have to behave like the other professional managers who had to come in with a strategy, with a plan, they got a budget, and they were measured against the performance that they promised to provide. And only I was in this position, and I was not alone. I knew from that time that many of the CCOs were in this position, that I had the trust of the CEO, of the founder. And as long as I had this, I could do whatever I wanted to do. That was the most important criteria. I'm a little bit exaggerating to make the point. But over the last 10, 15 years, I've realized that these, whether it was ever good old times, I question, but that these times clearly are over, that these days the CCO is held accountable like any other professional manager to be very responsible in the use of the resources that are handed over to him or her, who has to deliver against predicted outcome, against results. But at the same time, what hasn't changed, who also has to continue to be the trusted advisor for the CEO, who be in a position to have a tough performance feedback conversation upon him as a manager in managing his own resources, and at the same moment, behind closed doors, give tough feedback to the CEO because he or she hasn't just done a good job in the last interview or made a decision that is very, very difficult to communicate. And preparing people and supporting people to deal with this very unique role that I think doesn't exist anywhere else in a corporation is one of the challenges the EACD also wants to take on, because I think there is need for support. And one of the ways doing this is to create platforms where people who are in a similar situation can exchange their experiences and ideas. And the Forum is also not only to give you a keynote and have a discussion here, but also to bring you together to chat. But in this context, I'm extremely pleased that we could win over Michael Stewart, the global vice chairman of Edelman today, but who, when you Google him or go on his LinkedIn profile, see, has also deep roots in business consulting when he started at McKinsey. And today he is an often requested advisor to CEOs. So he knows also this very challenging environment quite well from his own experiences. And therefore, I'm very much looking forward to hear what Michael Stewart has to share with us, and would like you to give him a warm welcome. Michael.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Herbert, for that very kind introduction. And I know you have to run off to Thanksgiving dinner, so eat some turkey and pie for me, please. And thank you to everyone at the EACD and to all of you who've joined us tonight for what I hope will be a very provocative and inspiring discussion. So to kick off our discussion about the role of the CCO and CEO in that relationship, I would like to start by framing 3 points. First, I'd like to focus on the broader operating context. There are a number of tectonic shifts that are happening that are elevating, in my mind, the role and importance of communications and reputation management in delivering true enterprise-level outcomes. As a result of these shifts, the head of communications or head of corporate affairs is much more frequently a member of the C-suite, not just serving the C-suite, and has a more strategic role and a broader set of responsibilities. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means for us as professionals. Second, the changing operating context is leading to a different kind of relationship between the CCO and CEO. One where previously we were valued for expert execution across a number of channels and stakeholders, and increasingly, as Herbert said, becoming the true trusted advisor and counselor of the CEO on an ongoing basis. What I call the spider in the web, helping them make decisions across institutional silos and across stakeholder groups. And I think it's a very unique position that the CCO, Head of Corporate Affairs, can play. And third, as a result of the elevation of communications function and role and the elevated relationship with the CEO, there are significant new responsibilities and things that we need to deliver as Chief Communications Officers or Heads of Corporate Affairs. So I'm going to dive into these 3 points in some depth, but just say that I honestly think that this is the most exciting and inspiring time to be in our profession because the opportunities that we have before us are profound. So first, the external environment. As I'm sure many of you are feeling, the one thing that is constant is rapid ongoing change. Just go through a few. 87% of companies refer to themselves as being in the middle of a significant transformation. Yet, research by McKinsey & Company, my old firm, says that 3/4 of these transformations are destined to fail. The competitive landscape is shifting dramatically. Industry boundaries are blurring. Amazon is a retailer. It's a tech company, it's a space company, and it's several other things. Competition is now among frenemies. You've got the likes of Samsung and Apple, PayPal versus MasterCard and Visa. In the case of Samsung and Apple, the iPhone has several components that are made, critical components that are made by Samsung, that are only made by Samsung. Yet the two of them compete like hell to dominate the global mobile platform environment. Likewise, not many people know, but PayPal, through its tech-based Braintree, is the underpinnings of a lot of their competitors, including MasterCard and Visa. Yet all of them are competing for merchants and for share of consumer wallet every day. So it's a very different operating context. Next, technology, software, digitization are upending virtually every industry, from transportation, financial services, hospitality, healthcare. And at the same time, as this felt very palpably in this country, the geopolitical context is volatile and very unpredictable. The US's role in the world is changing dramatically. China's influence is rising. There are palpable tensions around the world from the Middle East, North Africa. Here in Europe, we've experienced Catalan vying to separate from the rest of Spain, the negotiations in Germany failing to form a coalition, the ongoing drama that is Brexit, that unfortunately as a Londoner I live every day, and these are just to name a few. All of these have significant implications for businesses and for the role that we do within our businesses. Another external element, our annual Edelman Trust Barometer tells us that there's been a dramatic depletion of trust in all institutions. This year, for the first time ever, trust in all 4 institutions of government, business, media, and NGOs declined. That's never happened before. And this is leading to fundamentally a loss of faith in the system, and resulting from that is populism, a genuine and, quite frankly, understandable disaffection by those who feel left behind, who are worried about the pace of technological change and what it means for their futures and their children's futures, and fundamentally a belief that the system is rigged for the elites. And now to the changing media landscape, which everyone in this room deals with day to day. Fueling this distrust is the change in how information and news flows. Long gone is the traditional pyramid of information coming from the top down, and a news cycle that can be played out in days and sometimes weeks. Today, information comes from anywhere at rapid pace. Whether it's true or not, it's shared in real time, and the news cycle can shift before you've even digested the previous news cycle. Okay? And consider facts around Facebook having 2 billion monthly users today, and 1 billion hours of video are watched on YouTube every single day. And that's just a profound number on social media. So in this environment, issues go viral fast and globally. So you've all heard about the incident of a passenger being forcibly removed from a US airliner last April. That was in Chicago, in the middle of the US. Within 24 hours, the video of that incident, because of the person's ethnicity, was seen by 200 million Chinese, 200 million in 24 hours. And a critical comment on Weibo, which is the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, had 600 million comments and views and several hundred thousand comments within the first 24 hours. So as a result of these forces, implications, creative destruction, how fast companies die is at an all-time high, and CEO tenure is at an all-time low in most countries. By one estimate, 40% of companies currently in the Fortune 500 will not exist in a decade. So in this environment, companies and leadership teams are literally fighting for survival. Delivering communications outcomes is not enough. We need to deliver business outcomes. So because of these dramatic changes, the good news is the corporate reputation is increasingly viewed as a critical and tangible asset that can be measured and can be built upon. This is because in a world where a tweet can affect stock price, employee comments in a community platform like Fishbowl can spread like wildfire and affect employee retention and attraction, effective communications clearly is having a bottom line impact. And the C-suite and the CEO in particular get that. Another example from my old McKinsey days that is a positive highlight is that for those companies that are undergoing transformation, the 3 quarters fail, they're 8 times more likely to be successful if they have robust communications across all stakeholder groups in place, particularly those that are focused on employees. So this is not our analysis, this is McKinsey's analysis of our profession, saying we are mission critical in these circumstances. So the increasing importance of communications and reputations means for me that now is the time for the rise of the CCO as a role, the rise of the head of corporate affairs, to assume our mantle as a shaper of the C-suite, not just as a doer. And this has happened before. If you think about the role of the CTO, technology over the past 20 years ago, chief technology officers bought equipment, did wires, and they were a service provider internally. Now, technology and how technology is organized defines entire industries and is the foundation of strategy in many, many circumstances. And I fundamentally believe that the same, because of all these changes in the external context, the work that we do is going through that same evolution of criticality. And we're starting to see it in a number of ways. Some anecdotes. According to research by Watson Helsby, this year for the first time, the majority of heads of corporate affairs in Europe of the FTSE 100 are members of their respective senior leadership teams. We've never had a majority who sat on the C-suite formally. And the number is going up every year. For the largest companies, the Fortune 20, it's already at 60% and growing. And 76% now report directly to the CEO. Only 4 or 5 years ago, it was less than half who reported to the CEO. Another example, if you peruse the delegate lists of Davos or the Fortune Global Forum, the big international fora, you will see more and more CCOs and heads of corporate affairs formally there as delegates, not as Sherpas, just taking the CEO around for the media interviews, but they're in their own right as a C-suite player. There are also an increasing number of communication leaders who are moving into broad operating roles. Beth Comstock is one famous example of GE moved from comms, marketing, and became vice chairman and oversaw huge elements of that organization. This is an increasing trend as well. So these are important proof points, but they're not universal yet. In order for reputation to be truly managed as a tangible asset, it requires a fundamental change in a CEO-CCO relationship. And the good news is, when you think about it, every other seat at the table, and Ida and I were talking about this previously, every other seat at the table except for the CEO in that C-suite, they tend to have vertical areas of responsibility, and they can get very siloed. It's the CEO and CCO who have transversal responsibilities across all stakeholders, across all issue areas. And for a CEO, it can be a lonely place where you're the only one who has that breadth of vision. And so to have the CCO at your side, taking in the same considerations, is incredibly valuable. In addition, the CCO, by nature of how reputation is built, is a spider in the web across all of these different stakeholder groups and all of these different areas of reputation development. And it's important to keep in mind, a company's reputation is not monolithic. It's a series of reputations. Reputation with the financial markets for delivering strong and reliable returns. Reputation with its employees for providing fair compensation and an inspiring workplace. Reputation with customers for providing value for money and innovative products and services. and with suppliers for being a reliable and equitable partner. And the CCO is the one who cuts across all of those reputations and makes sure it ladders up into a comprehensive overall corporate reputation. Now, maximizing across these shareholder groups can understandably result in trade-offs and tensions that need to be managed. And apart from the CEO, it's the head of corporate affairs, the ultimate custodian of the company's overall reputation, who has the widest view and can help come with a point of view of how do we best navigate across these various tensions, and has an agnostic perspective of what the right path forward could be. So what does this mean practically for the relationship between a CEO and a head of corporate affairs? I'll share briefly a blinded example of the experience of one of our clients who I know very well, who's the head of corporate affairs for a major financial services institution. This industry is hyper-competitive. The speed at which strategy evolves, the number of places where crises and issues come up every day, the immense competition for top talent, the number of stakeholders that need to be engaged. The CEO describes literally his life as a constant whirlwind. There are things coming at him from every direction, right? He relies on his head of corporate affairs, as Herbert said, as his trusted advisor, as a problem solver, as a close confidant. The head of corporate affairs proactively challenges across the organization, identifies challenges across the organization, brings his own sense of judgment to propose solutions, and he's demanded a seat at the table, to be there, often the last person in the room when the CEO has to make a tough decision. When all other siloed perspectives are held, he's the one with that transversal view who's in the room when those decisions are made. Notably, he also has the first call and the last call of the night with the CEO, and it tends to be a long one with a lot of stuff that the CEO needs to get off his plate onto somebody else's to keep the ball moving forward. So he's the guy who helps see around corners and helps find that signal from the noise, and there is a lot of noise in every CEO's mind. So he's fostered a close, intensive working relationship, and he is a peer, because of that proximity and the closeness with the CEO, he is considered a peer by everybody else on the C-suite. Now, this is just one example of a CCO-CEO dynamic, and it is an intense life when you're living that close to the center. But there are other examples. A US-based communications organization, Arthur Page, has done 3 studies of CEO expectations of corporate affairs over the past 10 years. I'll just call out one interesting development. This year's study says that communications is a central part of a company's overreaching business strategy, and that CCOs play a critical role in creating and implementing the strategy. Not just delivering execution, but creating and implementing the strategy. As one CEO put it, the head of corporate affairs needs to be a chess player, not a checkers player. They need to see many steps ahead. And I know Julia, who's here today from VMA Group, has done similar research in Europe, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her perspectives on this topic as well. So what does this mean for us for our jobs as CCOs, heads of corporate affairs? In this context, the CCO has to operate differently than she or he may have in the past. And I think there's 4 key elements that I would identify that are critical for success. First, business acumen. CCOs must first and foremost be business leaders with a deep knowledge of all aspects of the company, the competitive landscape, and they must be able to frame the communications imperatives within the language of the CEO and the language of the C-suite. It can't be about comms and comms outcomes. It has to be how what we do, the communications that we deliver across all stakeholders, is going to drive business outcomes. Back to the CEO survey I mentioned. In the years past, CEOs expressed hope their CEOs would understand the full business picture. They hoped that it was possible. Today, it's an absolute expectation that they fully manage reputation. CCOs need to be able to weigh in on all areas, including those far beyond their remit, from sales to supply chain, et cetera. Second, I talked about spider in the web. CCOs have to be proactively building relationships across the senior leadership team and across the organization. They need to have a deep understanding of what is it that the legal function is maximizing for, what is it that the sales function is maximizing for, what is it that procurement is maximizing for, so that they can be that spider in the web and often the interpreter between what those people are trying to accomplish and the overall corporate agenda that the CEO cares about. Right? I think this is a really genuine and unique value, that spider in the web, because of the transversal nature of the CCO role. Third, ROI, return on investment. As a profession, we must get better at measuring and proving our contributions to business outcomes. We must. Herbert mentioned this at the beginning. While CMOs have detailed information on customer journeys and sales and other tangible metrics, CFOs clearly have a battery of financial metrics. Communicators have too long been stuck in the world of impressions, of engagement, and language that is around communications versus business outcomes. Impressions don't demonstrate business impact. They just don't. In the CEO survey I referenced, CEOs said they really believe that a set of metrics that provide real-time information and about reputational performance and health are critical to the company, and they look to the CCOs to put those in place and hold the entire company to account. And the good news is that in the era of big data today and the developments in data, including in earned and the things that we control, there's so much more possibility to link the actions that we're helping drive in broad communications toolkit to business outcomes. And then fourth, something I'm sure we'll talk a lot about tonight is navigating societal expectations. And this is very tricky today in an era of populism, in an era of Trump, in an era of the change that we talked about. How do you navigate what society expects from companies and from CEOs in particular? And the chief communications officers, head of corporate affairs, need to help the CEOs know when and how to be out in front on social issues and when not to be, how to make sure they do it in a way that's authentic and comfortable to them, in the right platforms for them, but also not just default to a lowest common denominator, because expectations are growing. And this is where strategic executive positioning, in my view, makes a tremendous difference, and we can really add value as thought partners and counselors. Our view at Edelman is the days of the silent CEO are over. It's impossible just to entirely stick your head in the sand and think that all of these things that are happening in the external environment are going to wash over you. But it's not always clear what the right answer of how and when to engage is, and that's where we can play a tremendous role. A lot of CEOs are actually going to further lengths of becoming statesmen and activists. So if you look at Paul Polman at Unilever, his role in sustainability, if you look at Dan Schulman at PayPal, where he's an absolute advocate and shaper of social inclusion. Right? So that's one end of the extreme, but there's a long continuum that we need to help navigate. So in ever-changing operating context, the elevations of communications and reputation management as strategic imperatives, new and higher expectations of what we bring to the table as professionals. These are extremely interesting times for us in our profession, and I truly believe we've never had better conditions to have enterprise-level impact to affect business outcomes than we have today, if we're willing to rise to the occasion. So thank you very much, and I'll, I think, turn over to Inge.
Good. Yeah, now I hear. Thank you very much, Michael, for this setting us off what hopefully is going to be a very engaging forum. Okay, so here you have, this is me, I'm Inge. I'm the Managing Director of the EACD. And I'd like to introduce Julia and Ida, and actually I'd like to invite you to go and sit down whilst I introduce you. So Ida Gutiérrez de Escofet, I hope I pronounced it correctly, is Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs of the NH Hotel Group. And so, very special, she's in kind of at home here, I guess, right? She is a very seasoned professional, and she's got a lot of different experience, both in Spain as well as in the UK, where she worked for an important law firm before moving back to Madrid. And she's been Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs for the NH Hotel Group since 2010. And she indeed, as per Michael's point, she sits on the team and she reports directly to the company's CEO. And when Ramon Aragones would describe Ida, he says it's very difficult to define her role because it's ever-changing according to the company's needs. But he says if there's one word that he would describe which is important for her role, it's key. And she fulfills the role of a brand ambassador. She's the advisor to him. She's a coach for top executives, as well as a strategic communications planner. A guardian of the company's reputation to the company's visibility. And for that, she needs to efficiently manage the information of close to 400 hotels across 31 countries. And putting together the different pieces of a great NH jigsaw puzzle to make everything flow as efficiently as possible. So wonderful to have you on the panel. Then we have a CEO also on our panel with Julia Meighan. She's been the Chief Executive of the VMA Group, one of the largest specialist corporate communications and marketing executive search consultancies. And she regularly comments in all areas of leadership communications, employee engagement, and corporate reputation. She's also an executive coach specializing in helping communication leaders to increase the impact and influence at board level. And her executive director, Andrew Harvey, says she's a truly inspirational CEO who understands the value of communications and engagement. She's excellent in communications, seeing as it is integral to running a successful and socially responsible business, communicating to clients, employees, and other stakeholders in equal measure. So that's your panel. And then there's me. So I'm the managing director of the EACD, and it's a new function. I was appointed on the 1st of September. I've been 25 years in this profession, first 16 years in profit, working for in-house as well as mainly technology and telecom companies. But my last job in profit was working for an international oil company before I jumped my great transition to become the director of communications for Greenpeace International. And since then, I've been 10 years in non-profit trying to provide for a better world. And then this opportunity came to lead the association into its next, or to serve the association into its next phase. What I aim is for the panel members to discuss, but you've really come here to also contribute. So what I'm trying to make sure is that when you really feel that there's a topic that you'd like to contribute, make sure that you clearly identify that you'd like to speak, because we'd like to have a conversation with you as well. So starting, Julia and Ida, I'm looking at you. When you listen to what Michael's been saying, what really struck you? I mean, clearly, Michael, you described a couple of areas which are all very relevant, leading to the point that we are at a very exciting and very challenging and maybe even daunting time of our profession. What struck you most? Maybe, Julia, I can look at you because, as Michael was saying, you've done some research at the VMA group as well, which is relevant to contribute to this discussion.
Yeah. No, and I've just brought it along today just to sort of people show what it looks like. But so this piece of research we did was interviewing 40 chief executives in the summer of 2016, ranging from companies like Bayer, ING, KPMG, to smaller trade organisations. And it was very much a qualitative research. It was a 30-minute interview to really try and get some insight into what chief executives felt they needed from the CCO. And, just completely agreeing with Michael would be boring, so I'm not going to just say that. But obviously, what came out, and certainly what came out in these interviews, was absolutely correct in terms of what he said about huge transformation of this role of the CCO from expert, advisor, maybe, dare I say, quite tactical in their role, to really now required to be very strategic, business savvy, provocative, and somebody that can drive rather than influence change within their organisation. So I couldn't really agree more, and it's a very exciting time, but I agree it's daunting. When I finished this piece of research, and we sent it to a few communications directors to see what they think, and one of them phoned me up and said, "Blimey, I'm not in the special forces. What is this? I'm 1 minute I'm going to be a leader, and I've got to know exactly how the company makes its products. I've got to go and visit suppliers. The next one I've got to get a press release out." I think the challenge, which I'm sure we'll go on to talk to, is how does one make that transition? Definitely it's a call from CEOs, but in the day-to-day practicalities of CCOs, how do they actually get rid of the day job? So.
Good. Special forces, right? Are you ready? Ida, in the years that you've therefore worked in your role, have you seen the challenging building up to where you are today versus when you first joined, maybe? And then looking at what both Julia and Michael have described.
Yes, indeed. And I fully agree. I see my role as, the role as a spider in the web, as you described. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned earlier, I think we are the custodians or the guardians of the reputation. I think this has been there from the beginning when I joined the company, but the company has been through, any sort of group has been through different stages. I think this role has been increasingly key. Mm-hmm. So I completely agree with what you said. I think it's a transversal role. It's not a communications focus on media and the media value. And it's more strategic, so you have to be there all the time. And I think it has developed, the role from starting to be the communications director. Now the department is dealing with not only the PR, because we are a listed company, so we have to have PR corporate, also the consumer, because we have consumers, our guests, that we really want to get in our hotels, but also the institutional as well. I think this is the development of the role since I joined the company. And institutional, I think I see it as a PR, is more mid-term, it's not a short-term PR role, but it's key as well. And also the CSR roles, which is social, as you were mentioning earlier, which I think is key as well, that the CCO deals with this as well.
Any response to Michael?
No, as I said, I think maybe we have to think about rebranding at some point. I'll be a bit provocative. I think the roles are evolving. The most effective people that I work with in this space are heads of corporate affairs, and they have responsibility for a multitude of stakeholders. It tends to have public affairs, often investor relations, certainly social impact. And so it takes a very broad remit in how you think about the communications role. And whether we're just rebranding communications directors to include those things or coming up with a new title, I don't care. But I think EDA's portfolio is exactly what we require to have the impact that is at our potential.
But it makes sense. It makes sense. Because you are there influencing not only with the media, but also the institutional. As you said, you are a trusted person for the CEO, and you have to be there in order to work on a strategy and implement the plan, making sure that it's global and local as well. You really need to be very close to not only the CEO, I would say the CEO, the executive team as well, and also the business, the managing directors of the business units in our case, because then you see the global picture.
Yeah.
I'm just going to continue to just scan in case you guys want to respond, okay? So global local, you touched upon an issue, Ida, because I mean, in the old days, many years ago, the global local was less of a challenge, or at least it would take a couple of days. Whereas what you were pointing out as well, it's instant. And I think you've had quite an interesting week in that respect. You were in another part of the world, being responsible, and then something happened very crucially, which completely created a dynamic in terms of responding and what way of responding, and probably working very closely with your CEO. Do you want to just go into what happened, which I think is a quite interesting example of what we've been talking about?
Yes, indeed. It was a very interesting and exciting, I would say, I have to say, week. It was interesting and exciting. Why? Because I was on my way to Colombia. In fact, I arrived yesterday. And on my way to Colombia, the plane had Wi-Fi. So I connected to the Wi-Fi. I received a WhatsApp from someone, the responsible of PR corporate in our team, saying that we were going to be in the front page of Expansion the day after, with the, as you may know, with the offer of merger from one group, another hotel group, with NH Hotel Group. So I was on my way to Colombia to celebrate the 20th anniversary of NH Hotel Group in America, because we are going to be 40 years in 2018, but in America, 20 years. So I was there, and the CEO this was on Sunday night, and the CEO was going to take a plane on Monday midday. So the first thing I did was to send a message to the CEO, obviously, you have to come to Colombia, because we had a press conference, so it was perfect. The ingredients were all there. I had this pieces of news. Obviously, we're a listed company, so we had to react to that. We had to send a relevant fact to the regulator. But at the same time, we had a press conference. So we had all the media there, and my CEO was going to talk in front of the media. So 90 journalists were there, and all the Spanish correspondents were obviously there in Colombia, trying to find out more things about this deal. So how you manage that? I think it was very exciting. I have to say, I had even butterflies, because it was like really
adrenaline.
Really, yes. Super. What did you call us? Like a
Special forces.
Special forces. I think she's completely right. And no. So what you do is you work on a strategy. So what are we going to do? Because we cannot do anything about that. We are a listed company, and this is what it is. And the board of directors will decide whether to accept it or not. But I mean, it's not something that you can influence on. So you really need to keep doing what you were planned to do. So it's what we did. So we had a press conference on Tuesday, And then 90 people were there. We had a series of events, like 4 or 5 events with institutions, PR institutional. We had also our top accounts, as we call it in NH Hotel Group, and prospects as well, and friends of, and guests, and media. And so we were celebrating this. So as you're right, you know, it's a very busy week. My weeks are not like this, fortunately, but this one was quite a contrast, you know, 2 different news and how you communicate that and how you can influence.
Probably very specific on specific messaging, and it's totally taken over by a real-time other event elsewhere in the world.
Yes, but as long as you have a message, and I go back to your point, as long as you plan and you have a strategy, obviously you cannot control that. But I mean, if you have a plan, you have a reactive statement, you know what you're going to say, and you are clear with the messages. You know, the CEO, and this was, again, if the CEO has to trust you, because it was like you have to, obviously, you have to be there, and you have to say, keep, you know, business as usual, because it's our job. So he did brilliant. I was sharing this with my colleagues, and to date he was fantastic. And obviously all the Q&As were related to the question in Spain, but he was fine.
This brings me to a topic, and I'm interested in Michael and Julia, that I think you bringing to the fore, which was mentioned. It's the trusted advisor. And I think in the past we've seen that not being in a trusted advisor's role, we would get this kind of information later than maybe other members of the executive team. And being in the know makes us, of course, being prepared in a much different way. So what is your experience if you work with different clients of where this is at? I mean, are we at the early stage in the know, so we are indeed fulfilling that role of trusted advisor, or where's the profession at? And I think especially also you, Michael, serving, there's a difference between the in-house maybe as per the agency from the outside advising.
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, are you saying where are we in terms of, is it moving? I mean, I think I get the sense of that it's moving where there is credibility, where that CCO has really earned the right, if you like, to be the trusted advisor, and therefore they are even closer than perhaps they would have been otherwise, and would definitely be in the know and be able to anticipate and advise accordingly. I think, however, there is a bit of a polarisation going on between some CCOs that perhaps are not in that position to be in the know and haven't quite gained that trust between the CEO and the CCO, so they may not be in that position and may get to hear about those things afterwards. So that's my experience of what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think more and more companies, both the CEOs and the C-suite, this is their expectation, as we're seeing, they expect that. And I think it's an aspiration for a lot of the people in the corporate affairs and communications roles. But it's a lot of new skills and a lot of new things that you need to deliver. And it's multifaceted. To Ida's point, you are dealing with things that are literally a window of minutes, that's your time frame. And then you have to be thinking about 2 years from now. And you've got to keep all of those trains running at the same time, the instantaneous, right? So I think it's going to be a journey, and there's going to be organizations like VMA helping professionals build out these new tools, build out these new muscles that you need. But I absolutely believe the executives expect it, and the people in these roles want it. We get a lot of requests for people coming to us as an agency, help me. You've worked with people who are best in class in this. What can I learn from them? Can you introduce me to some who will have this role? What are the concrete steps of, from here's where I am now to here's where I want to be? And so you end up doing a lot more coaching than I ever thought I would in a role like this, but the aspiration's there.
I'm just wondering whether, because there's the power of being on the outside because you look at corporations in a different way than when you're in the in-house role. So do you see that you perform the sort of trusted advisor role to the person who is an in-house, who fulfills the trusted advisor role to the CEO, or do it directly? What is the situation there?
Both, and we're very, very careful. We consider ourselves serving the institution and the individuals, right? And our goal is never to disintermediate the head of communications or corporate affairs, because that's the last thing we can be doing. But if you are deeply putting their interests first and you're adding value to them, I found they never want to create a wall between you and the other executives, right? They just want to make sure that you're not trying to go around them. So yes, you spend a lot of time coaching them directly, being a trusted advisor to them. My main client, which is publicly known as PayPal, and I have a Sunday call every Sunday for several hours with the head of corporate affairs, because he's had several calls that day with the CEO, and I'm the person that he's bouncing all of those things off of. And so, it takes a village to do this stuff.
So work-life balance is a bit of a...
I'm out walking the dog and with my family, and I've got my little headphone on. It's all fine.
Well, I'm not going to PayPal, for sure. I'm not going to join PayPal, working on something.
Yeah, it's...
No, but you're right. I think it's important as well to have, for the plan that we put together for 2018, it was very important to have, these meetings with the chiefs of each area, responsible people, to find out their priorities in the global, headquarters. Is where we are, which is in Madrid, and then, with this outcome, with the priorities per department, then we share this with the local teams, and then they work on a local plan. Mm. So you have the transversal, globally, because there is, if you are also accompanying the plan, because as we were discussing earlier, you really need to make sure that you are part of the plan, of the strategic plan. If not, if you are just executing, as you were saying in your keynote speech, then.
I think this actually, well, before I go, I just want to say if there's anybody on this. Yeah? Hans. Maybe you could just say who you are. I know who you are, but...
Yeah.
I know who he is.
Hans Koeleman, KPN, Royal Dutch Telecom, and ICT. Now, I think I was wondering, let me put it differently. I was wondering the management challenge that the new CCOs get, right? Because although they are the trusted advisor, and although they have this tremendous broad portfolio and vision on things, and they have to look ahead, and they have to be speedy enough, they need people. And my experience is that you need to be very good in coaching people, also in give them the liberty and the trust to do their work in a very professional way, so that you have time to still think rather than do stuff, right? That's what you were saying as well. So how do you see that? Because I think that's a big challenge too. There are many people in our profession that always do the job almost themselves, right? In a way. I don't think that's even possible anymore. You can talk, you can listen, you can ask questions, but a lot of the work has to be done by somebody else, right? So I was wondering, and that's a question to maybe the three of you, how you see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. It's a great question indeed, I think.
It is.
Yeah, so...
It is. I completely agree. It's very important, because what you cannot do with this role, and I think this is one of how the role has evolved from when I joined the company. I think you cannot be reactive. You really need to be proactive, and in order to be proactive, you really need to think and see things and spend time with the leaders, with the management. And so the key for me is to have a great team, so you can trust, and this team that they can do, perform the different areas that they are responsible for. Because if not, it's impossible. I completely agree. But it's not easy, because we don't have the right number of people in our teams. So, and then it's difficult. So then also you rely on an agency that is, for us, is an extension of our team. But I fully agree. I think it's key. If you are only executing all the time, you don't have time, and you don't see things in perspective, and you cannot plan a strategy. So the key, for me, the key is that the team is key in this case.
I'd like to just add some dimension to this and reference your point, Julia, on the special forces. Because you think about armies, etc., there's no way to control. And I've seen in the sort of top-down and having teams, etc., of communications to make sure that everybody's on message kind of thing, which is totally undoable. So even when you talk about teams, are we talking about teams, or are we talking actually about all the people out there that you need to enable in order to respond in the right kind of way, which is really truly special forces. So I'd like to add that dimension to what Hans was saying.
I mean, I was just thinking about it. I mean, I have currently at the moment about 4 clients that I'm currently coaching that are communications directors that are not in this executive role at the moment. So they are responsible for communications, but they are feeling that they're not the trusted advisor of the CEO, that they're not, they don't have a place on the executive committee. So how do they get there? And the interesting thing, and the theme that I think is coming through is that actually quite often it's about courage. It's about some of those leadership skills which are quite alien to people that perhaps have come up through a real advisory route. The absolute best practice communications professionals. They've had a very, very successful career, and suddenly they find themselves in this leadership role, which requires them to have different skill sets and different characteristics. And so I liken it to actually that they're actually standing probably on the edge of the battlefield, just to make the conversation there and the analogy, is that actually you've got to get on the battlefield now and fight. You've got to fight for resources, you've got to fight for your position, your influence, your credibility as a leader of communications, not as an expert, because that's a given. You've got there because of that, because of the expertise, but actually it's about now challenging and being much more focused about getting what you want in order to serve the interests of the business. And I think that's really, it's about, for me, it's quite simple, although it's very complicated, but it's about courage and confidence in knowing what you're there to do and what's important to the organisation. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and just from a different angle, I think it's a tremendous question. I think it's probably one, attracting talent, figuring out the right organizational structure in these big, diverse, complicated roles. Like how do you put the pieces together operationally? And building judgment in the group when you know you can, the days where you can execute across this breadth of a responsibility, it's not, well, it's easier for me to do it. That's impossible. This is the single most difficult thing of all the things. Even becoming a trusted advisor, I think the team part is where most of the people that I work with really, really struggle. Because ultimately, if you don't have outstanding delivery on all these different dimensions day to day, if you hadn't nailed it on the messaging and had the right media, your opportunity to be a trusted advisor are shot, right? And you've got to deliver for people across the C-suite. So getting the right team, organized in the right way with the right combination of skill sets, the right external partners where appropriate, and then building that next level of judgment underneath you, because once you do reach that trusted advisor role yourself, the senior people in your team, that's the expectation for them as well when they're coming in and having a conversation on your behalf. So it's a heavy lift to get the team right, and I think it's often the one least appreciated by the senior executives. They take it for granted. Right? So I think it's a great observation.
Anyone else? We kind of touched upon it, and then we'll move to another. But I was thinking, how do we therefore prepare the next generation of CCOs? And I think combine it with what we've seen recently. I can't remember in what, it was in the trade comms or serving of management consultants. I mean, your background is with McKinsey. Management consultants moving into this space. And, we can be offensive rather than defensive about it. But I'd like to bring that in. So it's not just about what is it, how do we prepare the future generations, but how do we further equip ourselves? And do we see that there's a threat in terms of other functions moving in, or is it just an opportunity? Maybe go this way, Michael.
Yeah, look, I think it starts by having the same kind of conversations with your teams that you know are expected of you in an appropriate way. So things like, I always advise my team members that have parts of the team meetings that are not about your day-to-day work. Start off with a conversation like we did today. What's happening out there in the world that's affecting the work that we do? So what are the forces that are changing our world, not just in the media environment, but in politics, et cetera. So starting them get those muscles of thinking about the things that they need to understand in order to do their job well. When you're talking about something specific, have them go do research on outside in, what's happening in this piece of technology. Go read analyst reports. Make them more numerate and literate about the fundamentals of the business from a very, very early stage. So the best of our clients, they do this with people who are 2-3 years into the profession, and they think they're just trying to come learn how to be a media relations person. And so from the beginning, the old McKinsey thing is you're pie-shaped, right? You've got your technical, your toolkit that you're developing, and then there's your business acumen. And I think it's not like you spend 10 years becoming a great at your toolkit, and then all of a sudden business acumen happens. Both are journeys, and you've got to be operating on both of them simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, I think business acumen is a key one, and I think, I mean, my advice to communications directors now, but also people coming up, is that you have to get involved in other functions of the business. A secondment to another part of the business, but if you look at what we're saying about you're meant to align functional heads at board level, then that's a big challenge if you've never really worked in any of those departments, if you don't understand the function. People are bright cookies. You don't have to have done the job, but certainly you have to have spent some time in those functions. But also other things like undertaking and volunteering, key business projects could be a really great way of building your business acumen as well. But I agree with Michael, business acumen is key to this role, and I think people coming up into the profession should be advised accordingly, and you can invest in your teams to make sure that they have that before they get to the top.
I agree. I couldn't agree more with this. And if you're talking about a company like NH Hotel Group, like a global company, I will add, or specifically, I will talk about not knowing the product, the industry. I didn't know the industry that well when I joined the company. You get to learn the product. I think a must is a global mindset for a global company. Experience abroad is interesting, because then you see a multicultural, job, in a different areas, departments of different companies. And what I will add is also energy, a lot of energy for what you were saying, and passion. I think you really need to love what you do, because you really love the industry you are, you love the company you are working in, and really, then you can be for me, the perfect CCO, because you like the product, you believe what you're telling the stakeholders, and it's the best way. So I will say business, obviously, but also global mindset is key, and energy and passion.
Interesting. One of the things that I learned at some point quite early on in my career, I was the corporate PR manager for Motorola for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And my boss at the time was a great example of who hired people that were better than him. And that doesn't just apply to communication, it applies to any function. But if you are brave enough to be able to get people on your team that are better than you, that both serves the function as well as yourself. And I think that was a wonderful opportunity. And one thing that I have experienced with going from one sector to the other, I mean, from oil to Greenpeace, which, made an interesting pay cut experience, but it enabled me to learn so much more in a very different way. And I think it is something that we actually don't see a lot of still. I mean, I don't know whether you will confirm this, but I've met people the other way around. I've met them from Shell who said, I've been with Friends of the Earth. I'm like, well, but that's a different kind of transition than the one that I've done. So, because if you go to the different sectors, then, you broaden that kind of, but I feel that quite people are focused on one particular sector, and that's where they continue to experience. I mean, is that your experience too, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always generally historically been the case. I think particularly in sectors like financial services, etc. But now with the advent of challenger banks and the whole model of financial services changing, then actually I don't think that's the case. I think organisations are much more switched on now to having specific leadership skills, talent, broad range of experience and achievements outside necessarily, of the sector rather than in the sector, to be fair.
I completely agree. I think, with the amount of disruption that is happening, a lot of the disruption is from either tangential or completely outside the sector. And the problem is organizations get too myopic in where they're at. And if you believe that these roles are transversal, it's one of the most critical roles to make sure you've got the broadest set of perspectives and you see what's happening elsewhere. So we strongly encourage, to Edith's point, international experience and cross-sectoral experience over the course of your career. Absolutely.
Anyone? Edna?
I have a question.
Perfect.
So,
Could you just introduce yourself? I know you're Edna, but...
Sorry. Hi, I'm Edna. I'm the head of communication at the International Commission on Missing Persons. And like Inge, I've done tobacco, cars, and now I'm at an international organization. So, okay, not like, okay, Inge wouldn't do tobacco, but I've been on the other side. So I have a question, because one of the things I'm noticing is that you're saying, you're talking about the individual who's the communicator who wants to grow into the position of being the trusted advisor, okay? And it seems to me that a lot of the onus obviously is on us to grow. But I think there's also the reality of certain work environments. And I've been coaching people in various industries. Sometimes you need to leave and go to an organization that's willing to have you in that place. And I think we need to stop belittling ourselves if we're in an organization where, you know, we try, we train, etc., and yet don't have that opportunity. So.
I see nodding. Are we belittling ourselves?
No, but I agree, because if you don't get there, your role is not is very narrow. I mean, you cannot do that many things. You cannot influence. So,
and I think it goes to what Julia was saying: is step into that role, right?
Yes.
Be that leader.
Be brave.
And
yes.
not, be brave, be audacious.
But
right?
I also agree that no matter what you do, you can be very courageous and get on the battlefield. If the CEO doesn't get
Yes.
the fact that they need to have that important relationship with their CCO to build and defend their reputation, then I would say leave and we'll help you find another job.
Absolutely.
Yes, but sometimes you can try, changing a little bit the perception of the CEO of about communications and about public awareness. We've been my team and I we've been through different CEOs as well, and there are different people, new boss, new job, they say, and you really need to make sure that they trust you. So it's not easy because it's a new person, they don't know you. Normally they have their team of communication team or corporate affairs team in the previous company, and they give you an opportunity. And sometimes, it's wonderful if your client, which is the CEO or the executive team, are truly believers on communication, but sometimes it's not the case. So you really need to be, that's why I said about the energy, you really need, and passion, because you really need to convince and be brave, as she was mentioning. And obviously, if after some time, he's not going to change, for me, it will be a sign, that the company is not going to do so well. Because if there is something wrong on the communications, and you need to work on that. But I mean, after a while, if it doesn't work, obviously you need to move on. But you have to try, because we've been through that. I mean, I have some people here, Lucas and Rocío of my team, and it's difficult and uncertainty as well, because you don't know what is going to happen. But you really need to try and convince.
And I think if I can just add one more thing. Sometimes when one is the trusted advisor of the CEO, there can be challenges from other members of the executive team who are not comfortable with comms stepping into that role because they feel that you're taking their place.
Yeah, and I think one of the really important things is, the people who do this well know that, yes, they're a trusted advisor to the CEO, but they aspire to be trusted advisor to as much of the C-suite as possible, and they make sure that they're delivering for the entire C-suite and using language of the C-suite, right? It just being, the last person in the room for its own sake is not going to get you very far, right? The other people need to believe that you're helping get to really good outcomes transversely for the business. And, it's a big stakeholder engagement. The more challenging thing is when you have a CEO gets it and a couple of members of the C-suite, but some other influential ones who just don't care and are always going to be part of the problem, right? And I don't know I don't have any clients who have nailed it across the entire C-suite, right? But that's just part of the job. And it's any stakeholder engagement. You just got to keep going after and finding your ways around those who are the impediments, I think.
In this light, because we've talked about, and you and I were both interviewed as well, that was created into a blog post about this. It's about CEO positioning, and I think in the old days and PR companies said we position a CEO as if we sort of take the person and then we position him or her, often him, and I think those days are gone, right? It's a different kind of situation, and the great teams actually create great results rather than the one, even though we understand, of course, that a great leader influences the rest of the team. But I think it goes to then, how do you look at that whole CEO positioning element?
Well, in our case, I think we do have one CEO, but as you said, we don't want to overexpose him. So we really, because he's the top leader, and we have different CEOs as well in the company, and it's quite difficult to manage as well, because you do have the top leader, who is the CEO, the executive CEO, then we have the non-executive chairman, but also we are focused on the CEO and the executive team, who are CEOs of their own area, expertise. And also you have, in our case, 3 business units, so the experts on not only the field and the expertise, but the local flavor, which is key. So here you have more CEOs, like another kind of CEOs, but you really need to work with all of them. So this is the good news, that you can work with lots of people. The bad news is that you really need to make sure, as the guardian of the reputation, that the information, and is there the jigsaw and the puzzle of any sort of group comes. Because then you really need to make sure that all the pieces work together and you communicate the same from any of the 31 countries that we operate. So I think it's not the right thing to do to overexpose the CEO, because the CEO has to be the global CEO I'm talking about now. Yeah. The CEO has to be where the global CEOs have to be. And that's why you have experts in areas or locally. So you have to play around. And also it's very good for our business in our case, because then this facilitates the cross-selling, which is key for us, because we operate in 31 countries, we have almost 400 hotels. Yes, but we really need to attract the feeder markets, and sometimes we don't have hotels where the feeder markets are, like the US. So you really need to play with the business units, managing directors, to make sure that you do the proper cross-selling, so the communication and the messages get out there. It's a challenging role, but I think it's very exciting. But we don't focus on one person, because I think it's the wrong thing to do.
Completely agree. We refer to it as the work that we do as executive positioning, not as CEO positioning. We work with the executive team to figure out how do we work with each of them to position them as individuals and as representatives of the organization to best support the organization's strategy and commercial objectives. And we always start with that, and our clients start with that. What are we trying to achieve as an organization? And in a multifaceted organization with a holding company, operating companies, geographies, you've got to think across, again, it's 3D chess. What can each of those individuals bring? What platforms are they most good at and not good at? And you have to serve the entire group. If it's just about the celebrity CEO, you're going to piss off all the others, and they're going to become impediments for you, and you're not going to serve the company's interests.
Yeah, I mean, the only other comment I would make to both yours is that I think we all recognise now for CEOs to be successful, leadership communications is an essential element, I think, in this day and age, for all the reasons that we've discussed. However, there are still a number of the old vanguard hanging around in there in organisations, which makes the job very challenging, I think, in terms of positioning the CEO if they're, because I think, again, we talk about authenticity, transparency, now that CEOs need to they're totally accessible now by all of their stakeholders, etc. But if their communication skills are not good because, for whatever reason, they may, have a different technical background or whatever, then obviously that's still a real challenge. And I think then it's about finding other executives that can be positioned alongside the CEO. So I think it very much depends on the actual skills and ability to engage of the chief exec.
And also it depends on the CEO himself or herself, because it depends on how she or he is. And in our case, we are lucky because he trusts his team and he delegates. So you have experts with empowerment, you know, and then you can deal with them. But I agree. I mean, it depends on how you see that. But sometimes you are not allowed to do that because the CEO really wants to do everything and to be the celebrity. It's not our case, which facilitates our work.
Just want to add one other element to this. One of the most important stakeholder groups for executive positioning is internal. That's often overlooked. In a whole strategy, not just internal communications, but really positioning the themes and the priorities of the executive team internally. And it's not just to inform them, it's to turn them into advocates. So we have to remember, CEOs are not trusted. Only 37% of the respondents of our trust barometer trust CEOs today, and that's down 13 points from last year, and it's going down every year. So if the CEO is the only one out there representing the organization, or even the leadership team as a proxy for the CEO, you're not going to be effective. You have to bring the employees along, and the more that you can bring them in as advocates and out there in their own channels with the real belief and passion for the organization. So how much they spend time internally mobilizing that, army of advocates is as important as any event that they could go to or media interview they could give.
I think I saw a hand, am I correct? In the first row, the woman writing very fanatically. Did I see a hand? No? No. I see a hand there.
Hello, Ida knows me. Hello, hola, Ida. Juan Briz from Deutsche Bank here in Spain. Thank you. Just to add on this one, but if I can, I move to another direction. But I think it's about stakeholder management in regards to how we use the CEO. I'm totally agree with Michael. CEOs, particularly in moments of change, in transformation, I think they are transformation of agents of transformation in front of the employees, and then they become advocates. So also CEOs could be very important for some face-to-face meeting with relevant stakeholders. I'm sure that Ida at this moment with investors. So it's about the stakeholder management. As we all know, there's no blueprint for this. But the stakeholder management through CEOs is key. If I can move into a different direction, I'm very interested now in how the profession interacts with marketing, in particularly with the digital communication and digital marketing. And I think Julia may have a view on that. What's the right governance between marketing and communication? Obviously, for us as communication professionals, the higher we are in the organization, or the transversal, or the more transversal that we are, that's more relevant for us. But there are budgets, there is issues about branded content, how to govern all this is very challenging, and I'm very interested about Ida's view as well, because digital marketing is a very important component in the NH life, I think, and you have such an interesting view always in terms of sales, reaching the commercial goals, that it's very interesting. So thank you.
I'm sure that all three of you have a vision on this. So, Ida.
I think, Julia,
yeah, I'm happy to go first. So, I think we talked about where does communications beginning and end, and when you add marketing into the mix, then it becomes even more confusing as to where communications and marketing beginning and end. My advice to communications directors is just to go for the whole lot. But there is a real convergence going on. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Whoever owns the social media and website space is winning the ground, if you like, winning the war for resources and investment. And I genuinely think in years to come, we are definitely seeing more marketing and communications directors now popping up as the title. Often we're now with customer services added in as well, and regulatory affairs. So I think there's a real convergence going in, and I think that's the way it's going to go.
In the case of NH for the group, and the way we are structured is that I am the head of corporate affairs, not marketing. We have a chief marketing officer. and as Chief Commercial Officer. And I mentioned the two of them because I think it's very important to be super coordinated, the three of us, because obviously we need to know the commercial strategy, which are the markets, which are the targets, which are the top accounts, which are the prospects, and then again the jigsaw, that is a real jigsaw. But also with marketing you need to sit down and see, obviously they have the money, because normally in marketing they have a big but a very important budget compared to our budget, because we have to be very creative and you know, do huge campaigns or initiatives with another very high budget. But in any case, I think it's important that you work together very close to the marketing responsible to work on the media plans, because I think, for instance, the media, in our case, media plans you negotiate, you pay, you sponsor advertisements or with key media groups. So here we are, we come. We go to the meetings, or we influence on these investments, because obviously at the same meeting you can ask for content, for PR. You come to our hotels. For us it's easier because we have hotels, we have chefs, Michelin star chefs. We do have different things that we can put together for this gala dinner for a media, you know, like Harper's Bazaar. So it's interesting that you sit down with not only sit down. We have regular meetings. We meet once a week, minimum, the Chief Marketing Officer and I. So we know what we're doing, what we plan, which are the objectives, and we work together.
So I would say the only wrong answer, in my view, is for corporate affairs or corporate communications to report into the CMO. And I feel very, very strongly about that. The CMOs have commercial imperatives. Right? That's what they need to deliver on. Sales, volume, B2B, B2C, it's commercial imperatives. The CCO has a much broader set of imperatives, a broader set of stakeholders, and a broader, longer-term reputation that needs to be managed. And I've seen over and over again, when those two things get conflated and only maximizing for the commercial value, you do serious damage to broader stakeholders and to the reputation. Now, whether the right answer is for it always be the head of comms or not, I'm not as convinced. I think sometimes it is. It depends on the organization. But look, we will continue to lose that power and authority struggle with CMOs until we have better metrics that prove our work's impact on business outcomes, on key indices. Every leadership team gets together every time they meet and they look at a set of metrics, whether it's share price, whether it's certain people metrics, whether it's acquisition of new merchants and supply metrics, whatever it is. And they say, okay, you're spending X amount of money. Show me how that money is having impact on any of these matrices. And if what we're giving them is impressions, engagement, even on social media, well, we've got X thousands of followers on Facebook that are new, that is not a business metric, right? And I truly believe we're getting to an era where the data that we have available is as good or better, because it's not quite as noisy as the marketing data. And we as a collective need to start really moving on this. Otherwise, it will be default. They've got, even if they're not good metrics, they've got better metrics and better data than we do on the marketing side. And I really fear us continuing to be slotted under marketing, because I think it will be really devastating, not just for us as professionals, but for the organizations we're serving.
But also I think you need, I completely agree, but I think you also need to be brave again. And you need to practically present different ideas. And if you convince and you are consistent, I think in our case we have another example, which Christmas is very close now, and we have the marketing global campaign, the Christmas campaign of every year is marketing commercial, obviously. But we managed to convince the the CMO and the CEO to have a Christmas campaign based on one of our award-winning programs, CSR programs. I think it's not a marketing campaign, it's not a commercial campaign, but we managed because we work close, very, very close, and we were brave to put together, listen, this is something that we've been doing for 15 years, so we need to share with the world, because they would really want to be willing to see that, because it's a very interesting program. And so if you can influence as well, again, but I think you really need to make sure that they understand what you do and where is the fine line, because there is a very fine line sometimes between the marketing responsible and the CCO. But
and in social media, you were right, that's where it all comes together.
And social media,
social platforms.
Exactly. For instance, in our case, I cannot speak about NH Hotel Group now, but I mean, I think it's interesting to give examples as well. In our case, we have an umbrella, a brand umbrella, which is NH Hotel Group. So we, the CCO area, we deal with the social media of the group. Why? Again, because the stakeholders are there. So you have to really control or coordinate this. Whilst the different social media for the brands, the 4 brands, is dealt by the marketing department. So again, you have to be very close. You need to, because you work on the same strategy with different objectives.
I think you've made a very important point as well, is that it does depend on the kind of company and the kind of industry you're in.
Of course.
So some of these challenges are far greater in certain companies and sectors than they are in others.
Completely.
But our survey, the recent survey that we did as EACD, we also found that some people think that where we're heading is that we're becoming part of marketing. And I think you're making a very, very important point of what the remit is of communication versus the remit of marketing. I remember when I worked for Philips Electronics, my boss then said, marketing will never solve a crisis. It takes a very, very different approach. And if you think about where the world is at and how connected we are, that is one of the key things that makes this function, if dealt with correctly, stand out in a very different way.
Oh, and we've seen marketing create a few crises just in the past couple months. Right?
Well, seriously. That's exactly, yeah. And then the point of authenticity, depending on the kind of marketing, it could even drive away from that authenticity, which will then indeed create the crisis. So thank you for bringing that topic to the fore. See your finger here, but I've also seen, and then I see, okay, so yeah, please, if you can say where you are. And
yeah, I'm Bart Cabellon, I'm Director of Media Communication for Lenovo. You talked about social media, and I think we are positioning, being a trusted advisor of our executives, more in the, advising on messaging strategy or crisis management. But probably social media is one of the most powerful tools to build their own reputation and the company's reputation. And I personally think we are a bit behind where we should be. And many CEOs don't have even social media handles. They are not in Twitter. Many comms professionals don't have social media handles. And I think it's unbelievable. And I think we are losing something that we should be leading. And sometimes it's difficult because of the generation, and some of the CEOs they are not, digital natives, or, it's difficult, but I think there's a challenge, and I think we are losing a very, it's our zone, it's our job, and I think we are not probably doing well enough. And the problem is, if it's too prepped, if we try to advise our CEOs to be present in social media and they don't feel it or don't believe it, it's not genuine, it's not authentic. So, but on the other side, it's a pity they don't have a voice in the social media channel. So I just want to see if you agree or not.
Yes, we do. Yes, I agree. My CEO doesn't have to the last thing, to everything obviously, but I mean, my CEO doesn't have a profile. He's not familiar with that, and he's not going to. We cannot force someone, as you were saying. It's not real. It's not authentic. So if you are communicating and you are trying to force him to be in social media, yes, because everyone is there, I think it's not authentic. It's fake. It's artificial. So we don't do that. So I agree with that.
I think CEOs probably moved on slightly. In my experience, I think they have got kids that are using iPads and everything else, so they kind of know they need it, but they don't know what to do with it. And that's my experience, and I think there's a real opportunity there for the CCOs, because actually there isn't, I think to your point, I am in agreement with this, there's not a clear strategy often in organisations. The CEOs are not 100% confident about what their digital strategy is and why they should have it. And I think there's a real opportunity there for that the CCOs to take that mantle up and prove their value in the future by getting hold of that digital strategy.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think one of the potential gateway drugs for this, for the executive team, is convincing them that this is how you get to your internal audiences. That it's a safer area, and they might not even realize that once it's out there, everyone's seeing it, and you can reach other people. But they can be more convinced that the internal channels are very hard, right? And they're very crowded and they're clunky. And you can leapfrog that and get on the platforms where your people already are. And we can help you, and this is about internal messaging, and it's external messaging as well. That was certainly my experience at McKinsey. I couldn't get anybody on LinkedIn or anything. And then I said, we're sending all this stuff out in memos and emails. The people we're trying to recruit and the people 5 years in this organization haven't read an email. They're just not, right? But I guarantee you they're reading LinkedIn and Facebook. And so finding ways that are sort of safer bridging points versus you've got to be a superstar on social media and all that. But we have to get the executive teams on social media because that's where a lot of stakeholders are engaging with the organization. And if they're not there, you're invisible.
How do you advise on that response, in that respect, with regards to the authenticity element? I mean, I know that there's different strategies to advising your CEO with regards to that, but how do you advise clients in that front? I mean, if the CEO is totally uncomfortable, totally doesn't want to do it.
Again, I would say focus on the executive team and find those that are. And there's some CEOs that are just not, and you can't do it entirely on their behalf. If they're not willing to engage, you can't make it up or it won't be authentic. So sometimes you've got to do a workaround of just finding those people on the executive team who will, and that starts to build momentum and it broadens out a bit. But even the ones who are reluctant, there may be those moments. For example, they're going to give a big speech at Davos, and we're going to take this, we're going to do an interview, and we're going to do a clip, and we're going to put it on LinkedIn, right? That's just a speech at Davos that they're doing a clip of. And it's already in their workflow versus making them think they've got to do something fundamentally new. It's just another channel. It's just another way of reaching your stakeholders.
So I hope that this audience is fanatically tweeting about the things that we're talking about. Are you? Good. So, Jerry. No, Dennis, could you first please go here?
Thierry Nicolet, former SVP at Schneider Electric for Global PR. Thank you for your... I had a first comment for you, Michael. You did mention, and you said it again during the panel, that we can't just go on showing metrics such as impressions or sentiment or anything. We have to show business contribution. What example, because we all agree with that, but what actual examples can you give us of one of your customers actually achieving that? And that you could share, which is not confidential.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so it's very much a work in progress, and I don't know anyone who has cracked the holy grail on this. But one of the clients that I'm working with is creating a dashboard that is taking internal data and a number of external data sources, things like in the US, Glassdoor is a very prominent feed of sentiment, etc. So it's a combination of they're doing surveys with key stakeholders on sentiment around particular topics, and they're bringing a lot of external data sources all into an integrated dashboard. And all they're trying to show in the first instance is correlation. So you have, here's the map of the things that we're doing. Public affairs, here's the big seasonal campaign that we're doing, here is the speech that the CEO's given, and then you're looking at all of these feeds and you're trying to see what's moving. And over time, you're trying to find patterns. Okay, when we did these three things, this, our employees really saw that and we got positive feedback of some sense. Or we got, the public affairs people that we poll on an ongoing basis, the regulators, we had positive momentum here. And so we have a couple clients that we have two that I'm involved in that are experimenting with that. And again, today, the data sources are so much cheaper, the analytic capabilities are so much better, and it's just finding what is it that your company is measuring, what are they talking about as an executive committee, and then how do we find at least correlation of what we're doing that you can show some movement on those.
That's a very that's a really good point, and I'm happy you're saying so, because that's one of the things that we did at Schneider Electric, is to actually show the impact that a comparative review has had on the specific SKU that got the editor's choice. And it's amazing, because when you start showing up at the table of the execs and you show them, okay, this comparative review hit the streets on May, and starting May we had a bump in sales by 30%. You didn't increase your sales numbers, your sales reps.
Exactly.
You didn't. There was no extra advertising. There was no promos. It's not like buy 5 get 1 free.
Yeah.
It's really the impact of this positive review, and that is something that then they go, okay, fine for this, but how do you show me, social media? How do you show me something else? So it is complicated, but I really like the fact that the correlation is really the impact that we should be looking at.
Yeah.
The second comment I wanted to make is, how do you get people to do things and they don't feel they should be on social, they don't feel they should be communicating? I think one of the things that most communicators do not do, and should, and agencies for this as well, is to actually very much measure competition and show how you compare to the people and the environments you're competing with. Because that's one thing that we did at Schneider Electric, is to show and justify budget increases because our share of voice was getting hit. Because it doesn't matter if I have like 100 articles when I only had 10 articles last year, that's like 10 times increase. If my competitors have 2,000 articles, I'm just not visible. So that is something where we have to show the value of spending money in measuring not only your own performance, but how you exist in the whole universe.
A great example.
Thank you. The lady behind you. Yeah, just continue to talk.
Yes, okay. Yeah. I'm Carmen. I'm evolving now from corporate communications roles to communications consultant. So I'm like, it's a different work. But my question is about, we want to shape the future of communications, but don't you think that we have to evolve the storytelling of the communications director? I think that we always listen that we are the manager of the intangible assets. I don't feel like the manager of nothing intangible. I manage very tangible things. I add value to business, and I think that we have a lot to do in our own storytelling.
Completely. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I firmly believe, and I think more executive teams believe, that reputation is a tangible asset, and it can be valued, and you can show how it links to drivers of business. And again, we continue to be stuck in old metrics that are just not fit for purpose, and it's part ROI, it's part the different ways that we add value to an organization, and putting it in their language, right? Not about our communications language, but about business. So
yes,
I agree.
Sorry, but don't you think that I think that this question must be for Inge, because I think that the communications director has to do something about it, and we have to work very hard and really enhance the role, the strategic role that the communications director has, but not related to nothing intangible.
It's great to hear the invitation of something that we found in our survey recently as well, where people tell us that they'd like the EACD, but I think Arthur Page is a good example as well, of being far more the voice of the profession. And I think that's what you're saying. And I think there's some great communication leaders out there that are the voice of our profession. But indeed, I believe we can up the ante there. And if Herbert were still to be here, he's been advocating on the board how if you look MBA courses, for example, that apparently when that's being taught, it's still when they look at communication, it's either not there on the agenda, or it's still looked at in a very traditional way, like you describe, intangible or old-fashioned kind of PR, rather than where it is today. So I totally take the invitation, and I think that's something that we need to do. And I think it's something that we collectively do, and that goes back to stepping into the role of leadership. And whether it's about metrics, if we could all agree that we are going to stop to use the wrong kind of metrics, advertising money, value, etc., which apparently still, I was surprised recently, apparently it's still being used all over the place. Well, if you can just stop that first of all and get to the right kind of, collectively. And so we have an opportunity to further do that. So absolutely.
Need a strategic plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also because, just my last question, because I think that I can speak for myself, but I think that the communications director now is a very curious person, and we have to know a lot of things. We have to deepen a wide range of topics like technology, but for example, how we are building content through artificial intelligence, or chatbots, and a lot of things that I think it's not the common way or the common approach to communications, and we have really to improve our curiosity in other fields.
Well, and there's something about fear there, huh? And I think some of the discussion also with regards to marketing, it's a lot about fear of where things could be going. And if you think about some of the future projections, and recently, last week I was at the communication conference in the Netherlands, and when they were looking at things, they said, okay, the future focus, there will be no such thing as media spokespeople because it will all go to bots.
And some of that is in terms of customer relationship is already there. And because of big data and what you can do, you can actually automate quite a bit of that. Well, that will totally change the name of our game and where the function is going. And we might be fearful or we might be embraced, and we can see, okay, what is wise in terms of what we do, and what might be an area where we need to be careful of what we do. So yeah, I think the future will be totally fascinating. There was I see that the woman there starts to be, and Jan would like, is it true? Shall we go back to you? Are you on the same topic, or?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, is it okay, Jan, and then we'll come to you?
I'm fine with it.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. And I'm Allende Martin. I'm head of communications for a company worldwide manufacturing printing rollers, which is not digital, it's hard, but we are on it. And also I'm running a communications politics forum also. But my question, if I add it with my colleague Carmen, is that just because we are living in digital transformation, which is very important, and the CCO has to work in a transversal, as we had said before, with the CEO and with all our colleagues in the company, the way we have to work also using media, social media, and the way we have to be exposed. I think this is going to help a lot. This is going to change. I think so. That's maybe it's not a reflection. Or what do you think? Because digital transformation for the big companies is very good. For small companies and medium companies, it's very hard trying to, yeah.
I think that's what Michael was touching upon, right? Yes. The competitive space, what you were talking about in the opening. Yeah, it's a tough world out there.
It's very tough, yeah. And what do you think that is going to help us a lot, the digital transformation? And because it's going to be transversal, the way we are going to be working in the future, next coming future, coming.
If I may preempt, the last year or this year at our European Communications Summit that we organize every year, we had the head of digital for National Geographic, who previously has been in those roles. And before he stepped into that role, Marcus East, he's on LinkedIn, you can follow him, fascinating guy. He did a journey of going across and meeting many of the CEOs. And he was saying they are not prepared for where digital is really going to lead us. And it really shocked him. And he would go as far to say that if you're not prepared, you will no longer be there. That basically was his prediction. And if you talk about the changes, Michael, that you referred to, and how many fail and how many succeed, then yeah, the tough world is out there, but digital is key. Would you?
It is, and I mean, there's consultancies, my old firm, and lots of others making a lot of money trying to figure out how to help companies do this. And I think part of our role is to think about what it means for the various stakeholders, what it means for our own team, and how we work. Because we, global teams tend to still be very analog. They're sending documents all over the place, and I think just getting our teams to work differently, we're doing a lot of experiment within Edelman on this, of how do we get more collaborative spaces where you're doing real-time work together, where there's creation of stuff, where you're using new tools like computational behavioral psychology to affect your narrative creation. And I think it's just getting in and trying things, because that's how you start just getting a little bit of pattern recognition. But it's going to disrupt our function, all functions, as well as companies. And I just think, at a minimum, we've got to start people mentally getting prepared for it, that the world is changing very, very fast. To your point, the role of bots, the role of the likes of Cambridge Analytica, which can do highly predictive messaging for different stakeholders. And so what's our role in all that? What are the ethics of it? These are the conversations we need to be having, as a profession and in our own teams as well.
Did the microphone make it to you, Jan? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jan Hol. I'm in academic healthcare. I wanted to slightly change the paradigm of our discussioning, if you allow, because the panel members discussed about the trusted leader position with regard to the C-suite. And I wanted to understand to which extent you are discussing with the C-suite in your role as leadership and trusted persons, 3 usual vulnerabilities for C-suite members. One of them is they tend to focus on short-term instead of long-term. Second, they tend to work 24/7 instead of taking some time for reflection and silence. Third, home front, at home, their private relationships. I've been working across six different industries. I've seen CEOs fall in after a meltdown at home. To which extent you have experience of practicing this type of discussion with your CEO and C-suite?
Thank you, Jan. You can always trust on you to bring in the wisdom. Thank you. Who would like to go first?
Just to clarify, are we talking about the CEO or the CCO?
The C-suite.
The C-suite, the whole.
No, the executive team. No?
Okay. Yeah, the whole executive team, in terms of their well-being and the things that. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of the short-termism and the time. I think just particularly talking about the CCO, I think I've never seen such a stressed bunch of people right now in terms of the collecting, if you like, the responsibilities from their old, what we would call analog age, if you like, of content production and executive strategy translation services, for want of a better description, to now being very much part of the C-suite and being involved in all the strategic decisions. And I think, you know, there is going to be a crisis there unless that changes, because actually the world has become so complex, and I think the C-suite are incredibly stressed out. And I think the only solution for that, personally, is to actually understand that we're in an era of now needing really much more collective intelligence and talking about teams and that kind of thing. I think that's the way that business is going to move, and to not rely on one CEO, one small set of board members, but many, many more strategic advisors and input into trying to make sense of the complexity of the environments in which organisations are operating. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my view.
Yeah, and just to add, so I would say the role that I've described of the aspiration for the CCO, head of corporate affairs with the CEO, is the same that I find for any of the executives that I'm working for, whether it's CCO or otherwise, right? Find signal from noise and stay really relentlessly focused on priorities and what you're trying to achieve versus a lot of activity. These jobs are tough jobs. Just the corporate affairs roles internally these days in big firms like yours, they are incredibly demanding. I have, just as one example, I have a friend who was a CCO of a global firm in his late 30s. 4 years ago, he ran a double marathon with ease, right? He left his job because he burned out. I mean, this is a guy who's young with stamina and just couldn't hack it because he couldn't filter out what was really critical from what was just really necessary and important on any given day. And so, you know, I'll give you an example from 2 weeks ago. I met a friend who's another CCO. He was having 5 cities in 3 continents during the week and flying back on the Friday to give a big speech. And so I asked him, I said, well, let's walk through each of these. Tell me what they each are. 2 of them were absolutely unnecessary. It got down to, I'm the guy who, once I make a commitment, I never withdraw from that commitment. I will say, well, that's one fun way to measure your life. Another is to say, if you can't deliver on Friday and next week, you will have let a lot of other people down, right? So he didn't cancel the 2 trips I told him he should cancel, but he did cancel 1. And so I do think, you know, again, for me, it wasn't trying to tell him what to do, but it was like, let me help you think about what you need to deliver broadly and how to best set yourself up to do that. And these conversations do get very personal if you're playing that role with them. But you've got to challenge them, because they're like deer in headlights often. They're just running from one thing to the next.
I think this is very important. I think we are responsible for that as well. I mean, the CCO is responsible for prioritizing as well, because sometimes, you know, the CEO shouldn't be doing certain things, and also if he delegates, you have a team of people, as I was describing earlier, and I think it's the best way of working with a team and prioritizing and making sure that you work not only the short term, as you were mentioning, or not having time to, because they're all the time in meetings. I mean, so you really need to make the time to understand the priorities, and then make sure that you say you don't go to this, or I don't go to this specific trip. They went to Colombia and then they went to another place. I didn't go there because I was not necessary there. Mm-hmm. So you really need to say no, and say no to your role, and also for them, because you are like the filter sometimes. You know, there comes opportunities, and then you need to prioritize and decide or decline. Yeah? I think this is part of our responsibility as CEOs.
I think there's a dimension to it which one can touch upon in this area, that it's also very much where in the world you are at. And the culture that you're part of and what kind of leadership traits therefore are accepted. I think it's fair to say that in Asia there's different kind of leadership traits accepted that maybe are here or maybe in the US. So what therefore is the norm, and what determines wisdom and where is leadership heading? I think you see two things. You see the digitalization and the fast-moving need for responses, and at the same time you see a trend towards far more serving and humble leadership, where a leader can show that he or she can be vulnerable at times as well because of the challenging times we are in, and it depends on the way you can deal with that. And I think in the kind of context, industry, culture, I think that makes a difference. Yes. And for global corporations such as yours, and if you talk about your teams of CEOs, probably some of the CEOs therefore have an opportunity to respond in a slightly different way than some of the other CEOs, depending on the culture. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. And this is our challenge as well, because you need to make sure that they give the same message, although there are different cultures. And it's the beauty of this business as well. But it's risky, because again, if you are the guardian of the reputation, you really need to make sure that the spokesperson is the right one. And we are not talking about one spokesperson, but several, and from different countries, and from different culture as well.
And if I may use an example, I don't know whether you're all aware, I trust you are, of Sheryl Sandberg, the CCO of Facebook, who has been very strong in terms of women leadership, and leaning is her big point. And those of you who know her know that she lost her husband, and that in that area she's been outspoken how the CEO of Facebook has been extremely supportive in that. So that's, I think, an example of a different kind of leadership where you could deal with grief and you could still perform, but it's done in a very different way, which I think is different to maybe some of that other executive positioning and big fierceness, and goes to your point, I think, Jan, where you can have different elements in what's part of life, right?
It's a very good example.
So maybe then, just looking at the room and looking at the time, we're nearing the end. So if you've got 4 more, then there was one element that we've touched upon, which I think is also in this area of where do CEOs respond and where do CCOs advise on how to respond, and that's the changing political landscape. And you've seen examples, if you think about the elections in the US and the challenges with regards to immigrations, etc. Some of the CEOs have really stood up and said, look, we need these people that are maybe have come from other countries, we want them here. And there was a place for them to do so. Where do you see this? Is this something that was an individual driven? It made sense part of the corporations to do that? Was it maybe a dynamic and advice between the CCO and the CEO? Where do you think that the taking stance, where is that decision coming from?
I don't know where it's coming from in terms of whether it's coming from the board in general, the CEO, but I think it is changing. I think CEOs are starting to be more vocal, definitely. I think obviously that's proceed with caution, clearly, because as it depends on their opinion. But I think what people are looking for is for people such as CEOs, which are held up in high regard, to make sense of the world in such a troublesome times. And I think if they can make sense of the world and hold true to their values and the values of the organisation for which they represent, then I think it's a very positive thing to do. If they come out and have an opinion which may alienate as many people as they're trying to gather support for, then clearly it's not a sensible strategy.
You've articulated that beautifully.
I think it's the easier starting point is when an organization as a whole, its strategy has a deep purpose part of it, right? There are a number of organizations like Unilever where they've put sustainability right at the core of the strategy. Facebook's done it, increasingly is doing it, as I said, my client. And they're making sure that the issues that you're choosing and sort of the tempo and how high you're getting out there are really linked to why you're doing it. You're doing it sometimes for internal purposes because everybody who you brought in is mostly joined because of that purpose, and you're showing leadership on issues that collectively we as an organization believe in, or because there's commercial interests. I think it's more dangerous when you get into a situation where a CEO, through personal beliefs or personal passion, gets very far out in front on issues that are disjointed from the company, or even at odds with some of the company, because these organizations are broad churches, and most organizations, even the purpose-driven ones, have very different people inside. And so if you can articulate as we're doing this because this is our purpose, this is our strategy, that's why you're here, even if they disagree with you, they understand the logic for why you're doing that. If you're doing it just because you're the CEO and you're passionate, they're saying, no, you represent us as a firm, not just yourself. And as a CEO, it's really hard to say, oh, this is my personal hat over here. I'm not talking from an IBM perspective, whatever, right? And so I just think you need to realize the representative role of a CEO you give up your personal versus public persona when you take that mantle. You're representing the organization that you're part of, in my view.
Also beautifully said.
No, what I think I agree. I think it's important that the CEO, I mean, is a person, obviously, at the end of the day, but he's not there because of who he is. He's there because of the company. So whatever he says is going to influence and have an impact on the company. So he has to be very cautious, and he has to also, I'm talking about a listed company as well, but also I think it's not appropriate for a CEO to talk about this is my point of view and this is the company. I don't think no one do that. But in any case, in the case of NH Hotel Group, I think we take seriously this corporate social responsibility, which is something that we can do for the community, and we are active in the communities where we are present through different initiatives, and we have 3 pillars: planet, because we can influence there, because we build a new hotel, or because we are there and we are a footprint in the planet. And also we have the responsible business as well, and the way you interact and you deal with the stakeholders, I think is very important. And the third one is the people. People is key for us, and people meaning employees, starting with the employees, because if you don't have engaged employees, in our case, specifically in our case, I think it's very interesting to share this with you, because at the end of the day, we always say that we work a lot in headquarters, the board of directors, the chairman, the executive committee, all the areas. But the important thing is that the receptionist or whoever is in the hotel, when you go there, they smile. And if they don't smile, we could do a lot of things, but it's never going to work. So I think engagement is very important. So that for us is one of our pillars as well, people and employees. And also, obviously, our guests, which is all of you, our customers, our guests, that we really want them to feel what we do for the community as well. And the third one, what I was mentioning earlier, but that we are very proud of, is an award-winning program that has been there for 15 years. So it's like we take things seriously. We take the corporate responsibility very seriously. And it's hotels with a heart, that we basically donate rooms for the parents of seriously ill children who have to relocate cities because they have to be treated in hospitals. So but it's very interesting because we do this obviously we donate, we give for free the room unlimited, so 365 days a year. So some families, they have used it for 7 months. And it's a good news that they stay for so long, because this means that the child is treated and is doing well. But also it has an impact on the hotel again. So an impact because the employees become volunteers. I mean, volunteering because they become the second family, the extended family of this family who are, suffering. So I think we take this, and obviously our CEO is very, I think it's in the DNA of the company. So when things are in the DNA of the company and you have been doing them for a long time, I think you should feel proud and share it with the world. But again, I think from the CCO perspective, or in my case, this corporate affairs, because I'm responsible for CSR as well, I think there is a very fine line to what you can communicate there, because I don't want people to perceive that as marketing or interest, a specific, message for marketing purposes, because it's not. So that's why we started with this new Christmas campaign, celebrating the 10th anniversary. So I think it's very interesting because it is in our DNA, so all the employees feel very engaged with that, and we would like to tell the world that we're doing this, but we have to be cautious. Integrity, but we had our first investor day of the company, and we were very proud because our CEO, in one of his slides, was mentioning our CSR, commitment, and he's a truly believer on that. So I think it's very important, if they believe on that, that they share with the world as CEOs.
I just wanted to make one extra comment, actually. I mean, I think the world now expects CEOs to want to create a better environment for people to live in and thrive in. I think, you know, we're still there, we've still got some way to do, some way to go, but it's not enough now for CEOs just to want to make money and to build wealth for their organisation. I think the world is changing, public opinion is changing, public opinion is not going to stand for that in the future. So I think CEOs need to understand, or need to certainly communicate, that actually they are there to create a better fundamental environment for which their organisation sits in. And I think on that basis, then CEOs should stand up and should have opinion, you know, and otherwise shut up. You know, really do.
Yeah, and just to build on that, separating out individual companies from business as an institution, as I said in the opening comments, you know, the majority of people in our global survey have fundamentally lost faith in the system of delivering for them and their kids in the future, right? And they see business as a part of that problem. 60% of them expect business as leaders to play a role in solving social issues. Not necessarily just through speaking out, but admit that yes, capitalism is wonderful, it's created, you know, wealth in the world, globalization is fantastic, but there's dislocations, right? There is income gap. There is money going to capital that's not going to workers. There's automation coming that is threatening jobs. These are big issues, big social issues that business as an institution is fundamentally part of, good and bad. So figure out how can we part of the solutions for the bad parts, and not just say we're making money for our folks and our shareholders and all this other stuff will sort itself out. That expectation is absolutely clear, that people expect business to be part of the solution to these broader issues.
I think I'd like to close on that note, because I think you've just come to a very, very beautiful end. So I want to thank you, Michael, thank you, Julia, thank you, Ida, for this engaging discussion. But I want to thank you for being here with us tonight. I hope you have found this very meaningful. We will continue. There are going to be drinks and snacks, etc. out there, so we don't need to stop here. We're just going to take it into a different format. So thank you all very much, and thank you.
Thank you.